Hello. So for my final project, I'm going to be focusing on the democratic discussion of race in the classroom. And a little side note, the background there, it's a picture of a road, and the name of the background was called The Road Ahead. And I thought that was very appropriate because race is a very important topic right now as we are trying to progress and move ahead and become a better society. So I thought it was a very fitting background. So for starters, why is this talk important? Personally, I believe that it is our job as teachers to not only prepare students for academic success, but also real world success. And with that being said, race is a very important aspect of our real worlds. And another reason why it's important to talk about this in school is racial discussions are often taboo and neglected in many households. So I believe it is the teacher's job to maybe fill that void and that negligence, and have that challenging conversation with your students. And lastly, I think it's important because understanding the role of race and the way race plays out in society will allow our students to become progressive human beings moving forward into their adult lives. And like I said, it's our job to prepare them for the real world, and making them progressive human beings would be the ultimate goal. So I wanted to focus on a few aspects of race that I think are important to talk about, even though there are many that could be addressed. These are just a few I wanted to talk about. So first is white privilege, and white privilege it's undeniable. It's an undeniable aspect of our life, and I believe it needs to be addressed early. And by addressing it early, it will help remove that negative stigma that's associated with it. I think it's important that our students understand that white folks are born into a life that is sort of catered to them. For example, like most quality of life statistics in the United States, they favor white Americans in comparison to black Americans. I think it's important to normalize white privilege and use it as an opportunity for growth. That kind of goes with removing that stigma. We need to normalize it. Look at it as an opportunity and not a bad thing. And lastly, I believe that white privilege does not define a white person. How they utilize it for good or whether they neglect it, that does define them. Another aspect of race I believe needs to be addressed with your students would be just racial disparities that you see on a normal basis in our country. So for starters, I think it's important to talk about wealth with our students. Look at the income disparity in our country. In 2017, the average white household income was roughly $68,000, compared to the average black household income, which was roughly $40,000. It's important to look at crime disparities in our country. According to BBC, unarmed African Americans have a much higher likelihood of being shot than white Americans. I believe the number is like 2 or 3 times more likely. African Americans are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession compared to their white counterparts. And lastly, the imprisonment rate for African Americans is 5 times greater than the white imprisonment rate. Those are just a few aspects of our criminal justice system that really shows racial disparities in our country. Another aspect that I believe our students need to be taught about are educational disparities between races. And let's look here. We have high school graduation rates between white Americans, which is roughly 93%, compared to African Americans, which is 87%. The associate's degree rate for white Americans is roughly 47%, compared to African Americans at roughly 32%. And then you can take a look at the bachelor's degree rate, and it's roughly 36% for white Americans and roughly 23% for African Americans. So you can see that pretty much at every level of education, white people have a greater opportunity for success, and they're attaining more education than their black counterparts. Huge disparity in this aspect of life. So health is another aspect of our life where we see huge disparities between race. White Americans, they live on average of 3.5 years longer than African Americans. The infant mortality rate for African Americans is nearly 2.5 times higher than white Americans at 11.4 per 1,000 births compared to 4.9 per 1,000 births. And then you can see that non-Hispanic blacks, roughly 50% of them kind of develop obesity compared to white Americans who are roughly at 42%. Another aspect where I believe race needs to be addressed to our students is in the curriculum. Curricula has often been catered to the white student. Examples of that would be whitewash history. Speaking on my own perspective, before I went to college, I only really learned about white history, and it was painted really positively. You didn't really hear about the bad things that white people did. Likewise, you didn't hear much about African Americans and the great things they did. The only time you would really hear much about that was during Black History Month. I think it is important that our students are aware of that fact, that the history that they're being taught or have been taught may not be entirely accurate. They need to be aware of that. But moving on from that, I believe it is important that we as educators diversify our curriculum. In doing such, we will expose our students to different perspectives and naturally let them become racially aware. I think the curriculum is a great way to, let's say, passively introduce topics of race and bring about awareness without shoving it in our students' faces. And though that may not be a bad thing, but this is just a nice passive way to get them started and get them aware. So I want to talk about some ways we can bring about discussion with race with our students. On the ADL website, they had some great tips on how to develop a classroom to where this conversation would go over smoothly. And they suggested setting group guidelines, helping students accept their discomfort and uncertainty. Make sure students are not colorblind. We want them to see color because that will help them address the issues that are associated with it. We want to acknowledge the process of learning about race and racism, provide opportunity to learn about others, but also foster empathy, make sure no one's feeling guilty, and make sure everyone's accepted. Address white privilege from non-defensive ways, and connect to ally behaviors. The ultimate goal is to provide an environment that accommodates growth and positivity. When addressing race with our students, it has to be done, in my opinion. We need to address it with students, and I think it is best if you create an environment that is forgiving and understanding and positive. Make sure nobody feels ashamed, or you don't want to push people away from this topic. You want everyone to be involved. You want everyone to grow. So ultimately, progress can be made in the future. So I want to talk about backlash that might be associated with this. As I mentioned earlier, talking about race could kind of be taboo for some people. There's stigmas associated with it, and with that being said, it's almost certain that you'll get some sort of backlash from students or parents or maybe coworkers. But I think it's important to stay true to who you are morally, and stay true to what's important to you. Stay true to the fact that you are responsible for teaching your students this important content, no matter how difficult it may be. And then additionally, for those people who do question you, don't take offense to it. Don't get defensive. Try to educate them. Be peaceful. It may be a challenge for them, but you could be that voice that really changes their mind and brings about change. So, in sum, racism is a topic that needs to be addressed in order to create positive change in the future. We need to make sure our students understand the severity of racism in our country without creating blame. And we need to create a classroom discussion and curriculum that accommodates growth in racial awareness. Sort of the whole theme I've been talking about is having discussions with our students, developing curriculum for our students to where they become racially aware and they want to help society progress and help remove racism and however it may be in society. I think by exposing them to these conversations and this content, they will be more likely to grow up and be progressive adults, as I have already mentioned. And I believe that is something that is very important that all teachers should be doing or looking to do, no matter how difficult it may be. It's our responsibility, and I truly believe that. And last but not least, my reference slide. So, just want to thank you again for watching. And I just want to leave you with the idea that you need to try to challenge yourself moving forward into new school years and trying to really tackle this topic with your students, with their families, with your coworkers. I firmly believe if you are not a part of the solution and talking about these issues, then you are a part of the problem. So I believe all of our teachers should be a part of the solution and bring about change in our students and positive change in the future of our society. So, once again, thank you very much for watching.